Hello and welcome to this week's video of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing Volume 4 of Vigilantes. You know how this works by now. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below, and you will be read out in a future video. While you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place to small broadcasters. Support your local small broadcaster today. It will do them a power of good, and we're very close to breaking a 105 subscriber goal. If we break that target, then I will be doing a review of the second My Hero Academia movie. It would be great to do that before too long. It was always good to get new subscribers, but between then and now, let us get into the review itself. And I'll just say here and now, very quickly, for anyone that's accidentally going onto this video is going to be spoiler heavy, so if you haven't seen Volume 4 of Vigilantes, and you don't want it spoiled for you, then maybe find something else to watch. But for everybody else, let us get into the review itself, and I have to say that this is probably the most ambitious volume of this series thus far. This is an attempt to take two characters, two functionally side characters, and give them a level of depth and character development that I honestly feel that they've been lacking up until this point. Whilst there have been attempts to build up PopStep, they've always felt like they were building up for stuff that would end up happening far later in the storyline, and even then, that build-up only felt like hints rather than very deliberate things. With Knuckleduster, while there were a few hints here and there as to the true nature of his character, they always, again, just felt like vague hints. And as a whole entity, Knuckleduster always felt a little bit more like a gag character, more so than a three-dimensional one. As I've mentioned many times in my reviews, and as I've been mentioned in other videos on YouTube, Knuckleduster as a character feels like Batman minus the tech or the subtlety. He just charges in headlong to any kind of problem and beats the hell out of it until either he or it go down. And most of his dialogue is written in a way which is supposed to be taken as being rather humorous. Not only are they trying to do these two storylines, but they're also trying to do them at the exact same time, something that can be incredibly difficult to do, and I'll discuss later on whether or not I feel they actually stuck the landing as far as that is concerned. The initial focus in this volume is a lot focused around PopStep, and showing a side of her that we've never really had shown to us, maybe hinted here and there, but never really explored. In this volume we learn that PopStep, behind the big, confident performer persona, is rather anxious and nervous deep down. Even when she is in this performer persona, this PopStep persona, she's still kind of nervous and still gets stage fright and still can't deal with actually being on stage and performing in front of hundreds of people. We've never really had that much of a focus on PopStep as a character really up until this point. Yes, there was the episode Him in the previous volume, but that, as well as the episodes that then came after that, felt like they were more building up to a whole will they, won't they storyline with her and Crawler. And I will admit I'm glad that they've kind of put that stuff on the back burner for now, and have spent most of this volume just trying to build up her character and to give us something to latch onto as far as who she is as a person, rather than spending time building up this love triangle between her, Crawler, and Mikato. Like, I am respectful of the fact they're actually spending time to make her feel like a real human being, though I will admit I don't think the text as a whole entity, this is referring to the writing of the volume as a whole, really goes quite as far as I was like to. Most of the runtime of this volume feels like it's spent dealing with the dynamics of how to put on the gig, more so than spending time dealing with the dynamics of the people taking part within the gig. Yes, there's a few gags here and there's a slight bit of drama behind the scenes, but it never really goes quite as far as it really should to. And yes, the whole gag of Mikato turning something that was essentially just light music playing in the background while people bought cabbages or what have you, and turning it into Glastonbury is funny, but all that kind of side of things just takes away from a lot of potential character drama, which I really think would have elevated this volume as a whole. The humour within the volume is generally fine. I think the previous volume was far funnier, but to be fair, I understand why this volume is less of a laughter fest, because this volume as a whole entity is far more serious. There is just greater emotionally heavy stuff happening here, and when it isn't, then we've either got to deal with drama around the action, and of course, body horror stuff. We get a lot of very weird, creepy body horror stuff in here, and I kind of like it, even if it does make my skin crawl a little bit. We've got the bit with Bee's new family, which is just a collection of slowly rotting corpses. We have the episodes where the bees appeared from that girl, and then we get the bit towards the end of the volume where the bee parasite is removed from Knuckleduster's functionally dead daughter's head. Though, of course, she is revived and brought back but, you know, it's still kind of gross, nasty stuff. But, hey, it makes sense, and I am glad that they didn't undercut the drama with an excessive number of jokes, and the jokes that they do have feel well-timed and well-written for what they are. The exploration of Knuckleduster's character feels a lot more subtle in the earlier stages of this volume, then eventually evolves into something I feel becomes a lot more explicit later on. This isn't a slight against the volume itself, it's just that we go from a series of hints as to why they are the way they are, to just a general focus on it. And again, that's not meant as a criticism, that's just literally what we got. In the early stages of this volume, we just kind of get hints as to why he is so distant with people, why he's oftentimes so short-tempered with people, and hints as to why he's hanging around with people that are young enough to be his kids, and then we end up learning why he does all these things. The reason why he's hanging out with them is because he sees them as the family that he never had. The reason why he's so distant and short-tempered with people is because he's worried about his wife, who seems to be terminally ill, and the fact his daughter's been taken over by a parasite. You know, I can understand. I can sympathise with someone being kind of snippy as a result of all that, because that's some heavy shit to deal with. We also learn that the reason why he's as durable as he is isn't just because he's strong, it's because he takes a bunch of painkillers. This adds a great sense of depth to his character, as well as avoids certain tropes. Like, you could easily just turn around and say, oh, he's just anime strong, or alternatively, oh, he's taking some kind of superhero drug so he can do all this stuff. No, he's just taking painkillers. He's taking them to numb the pain of battle, and possibly numb the pain of all the drama and nastiness that happened within his life. And I like that. It adds grit, it adds weight to the world. It makes this feel a little bit more lived in, a little bit more realistic than had he just been taking some kind of drug with some kind of funky name. I feel that from a purely functional point of view, the ending episode of this volume is probably the best possible ending that you could have, purely almost from a mechanical point of view. It concludes everything neatly, possibly a little bit too neatly here and there, but it does leave the door open for more things to happen later on. I think the final episode as a whole entity could have been done better, and that there is a bit of overhang into the next volume as far as certain plot lines is concerned, but I do think it is strong enough for what it is. And unlike the ending for the previous volume, it doesn't feel like it's just driven into a dead end. It doesn't feel like it's just kind of reached the point where, okay, so now what do we do? It set up its next few volumes of storylines quite neatly, and I can really commend it for that. It's really just show a line of improvement here. And without getting into the overview itself prematurely, I do think the volume itself is solid. It covers a lot of ground, I have to say, that does make it feel a little bit more like a typical My Hero Academia storyline, more so than a Vigilantes storyline. But, you know, I do respect the fact that there are greater emotional stakes here than we've really had before. A lot of what we've had up until this point has been felt a little bit more on the physical side of things. It's more of a, we have to stop this bad guy, which, understandable, but at the same time it just didn't quite have the same kind of impact as certain storylines with My Hero Academia, and it is nice to get a hint of that here and now. But I do feel that as a whole entity, this volume does feel like a bit of a near miss. Like, there are many great things in many of the episodes, and again, as a whole entity, the volume itself is good, but I just don't think it really sticks the landing for me. So with that said, let us get into the negatives, and I have to say that in hindsight, the whole gig storyline stuff is just rather disappointing. And not just from a character development point of view, but also in terms of scale. When it started out, it felt like this whole storyline was going to be the whole storyline of this volume, or at least it was going to be the major focus of it. And it was going to involve all our main cast members to some degree or another, though of course with a majority focus on PopStep. Much of the runtime of the opening half of the volume is spent building up, again, trying to build up the dynamics of how this event is going to be pulled off, and in the end it all just kind of gets pushed to one side the moment that Knuckleduster shows up to have his big confrontation with his daughter. Yes, the storyline with Knuckleduster and his daughter is a lot more emotively engaging, at least in theory, but that storyline itself doesn't really get much of a build-up. It just seems to happen and then override everything else. Knuckleduster leaves the story pretty early into this volume. He disappears off into the shadows, then maybe we get a quick shot of him spying on B, then nothing for a few episodes, and then he's back, and Then he takes full focus of everything. Him and his stuff with his daughter takes full focus of everything. And again, I can understand people being more emotionally engaged with this storyline than the gig stuff, but it does feel a little bit odd to me. It means the whole gig storyline stuff feels like it's gone from an A storyline to a B storyline, and then by the end of it, it started to feel like it was starting to become a C storyline. And when I say A, B, C, I don't mean it in terms of quality. I'm not saying it that, oh, if it wasn't for Knuckleduster, this would be an A-grade storyline. I just mean more in terms of their focus. Like an A storyline would be the main storyline. The B storyline would be something that happens alongside it, typically a little bit more character-related. And the C storyline would be something that's a little bit far shorter that just kind of comes up to just, you know, fill out time. Like, imagine it from the sake of, oh, it's a Dragon Ball storyline. The A storyline is Goku versus Frieza. The B storyline is Gohan learning to use his power effectively and overcome his fear. And the C storyline is Bulma trying to get the Dragon Balls and fighting a giant crab. Basically like that. And in the end, this big emotional story of PopStep overcoming her personal anxieties doesn't even get for her to fight the giant crab. I do feel that this whole stuff, these two storylines could have been done better. I think that in the hands of a different writer, a more experienced writer or writing team, they could have balanced this out a lot more and focused it a little bit more. Maybe have both the emotional climaxes of both these storylines happening closer to one another, because it does feel like PopStep's storyline is just concluded like midway through the volume, and the rest of the time there is just, oh, what are they doing? Oh, they're singing. Back to Knuckleduster. Oh, what are they doing? They're still singing. Now back to Knuckleduster. And nothing much of substance really happens there. Like, it generally does feel like PopStep has been kicked out of her own storyline. And that does really grind my gears beyond what I may not think about PopStep. Because when we break this down into just the function of it all, we're taking one of our main characters and having a storyline where they try to overcome one of their greatest fears. We have seen a vulnerability within them that may have been hinted in before in the past, but has never really been seen. And now this is the great moment for them to finally overcome this fear and to really become the person that they were always meant to be. And we don't quite get that. And I'm sure that one of you out there listening will turn around and say, Chris, come on. She still did that. She still overcame her anxieties and defeated a mental problem within her life. She still did that, and that is true. She still did it, but not quite as effectively as it should have done. I think that if we're to look at this as a purely mechanical exercise, I think that the whole thing of Knuckleduster saving his daughter should have been happening parallel to PopStep finally overcoming her anxiety. We should have both those big emotional crescendo moments happening close to one another. If not within the same episode, then maybe within an episode of one another. Maybe one happens in the episode before it, then you get the other one. Or ideally both happen in the same episode, but we don't end up getting that. Again, PopStep within her own storyline feels like she's been pushed to one side, which starts to lead us on to the monster villain. Now, early in this volume, we learned that the young lad with the eel power, who we saw previously getting led away by B, has been mutated into this big, nasty, scary, slimy monster thing. Yet, he still retains some sense of self due to his infatuation with PopStep. Now, up until this point, we have seen in Episode 0 special that I reviewed last week, as well as throughout this entire series thus far, there's a lot of people which, to be blunt, have some rather pervy attitudes towards PopStep, and don't see her as a person, but see her as a thing to just leer at. It's just this, and this slimy, nasty-looking monster represents that clingy, rather uncomfortable fan getting close to the pop star thing that I'm sure that you've probably seen examples of that far more times than is necessary. And this creature and that whole dynamic represents that seedy nastiness that PopStep as a performer has to deal with, as well as also representing the anxiety that PopStep has as a performer when doing full shows in front of a full audience. As it is literally something that stops her performing and stops her doing a full show. She can't do a full show because she's scared shitless of what people may think of her, and now literally there's this monster who's stopping her from doing a full performance. This whole thing is just monster as metaphor, and logic would then dictate that PopStep would be the one to stop them. She would be the one to take them down one way or another. She either defeats the slimy, nasty, clingy, pervy monster as a superhero, or she manages to soothe it as a pop star by singing at it, or she manages to reach out to them as a human being and say, I'm a human being underneath all of this. But none of that happens. Instead, we get a supporting character from the main series to deal with them. A character who, within this particular series, is a side character at best, or a I remember thing cameo. Sure, this is a character who, if you've been reading the series up until this point, you've probably got some kind of like in it. You know them from the main series. You've got some kind of preference to them. But here and now, they're a character who has no emotional or personal stake in any of this, aside from this just being their day job. And sure, later on, it looks like we're going to get a bit more of a focus on this character. We're going to get more of a deep dive into the backstory of Eraserhead. But up until now, as far as this series is concerned, he is just a guy. Eraserhead is just a guy who ends up dealing with a monster that one of our characters should be dealing with, because that monster represents the fears and anxieties of that character. This means that this entire storyline, which has been going on now, if we especially take it on board from like the original release schedule, has been going on for 9 weeks, just kind of fizzles out. The gig happens, the song is sung, and that is it. With most of the latter half of this run, this entire storyline being our cast going, oh boy, I wonder when the lights are going to come back on, until the song happens, and that's just about it. Sure, in fairness, the last stuff that we really see of this volume with our cast of characters is another little montage of PopStep really dancing and really getting into the swing of things and enjoying things. That stuff is cute, but it doesn't have the kind of same emotional weight to it had she just defeated the literal physical embodiment of all her fears and anxieties as a person, as a performer. And all of this ends up leaving us with the Knuckleduster versus Bee storyline. A storyline which just leaps into the volume midway through. Yes, we've had a few hints here and there that something else is going on, but up until now, it hasn't really meant all that much. And now here it is, and it overwrites everything that else is going on. And the big emotional conclusion to that storyline, the big moment when Knuckleduster would finally be reunited with his daughter, won't happen until the next volume. As an action sequence, all the stuff with Knuckleduster versus Bee is great. The emotional side of it is great, but it lacks the emotive conclusion that it really needs to make this all feel complete. Again, almost as soon as Knuckleduster Bee stuff ends, we go back to the PopStep stuff and then into detective stuff, which then sets up possibly the storyline for the next volume or the volume after that. This entire volume is 2 storylines that, rather than running in tandem with one another and reaching their apexes around the same kind of time as one another, just don't. They kind of rub against each other, clash against each other, steal oxygen for one another, with one of them feeling like they ended midway through the run and the other one just ending without the big emotional conclusion that it really needed. Knuckleduster needed to be reunited with his daughter. Even if it was just before she passed out, she looked up at him, said thank you, and that was it. The stuff with PopStep and her big performance needed to look like it wasn't going to happen at all. Like, she was going to run away and hide, but that didn't happen. She just sat in a corner. Oh, should I do this? Should I not? Oh, the lights are back on. Well, time to go out on stage. And in the end, regrettably, I don't think either storyline really reached the natural apex that it did do, because, well, I just think the writers bit off a little bit more than they could chew. And with that said, let us get into the overview. As I said towards the start of this review, I think that this is probably the most ambitious volume that we've had thus far. Purely and simply because of what it's trying to do, but I think that at the end of the day, it bit off more than it could chew. They were trying to juggle 2 very different storylines at once, and in the hands of a more experienced writer or writing team, they could have paced this out in such a way that this wouldn't have felt as quite as jank as it really would have done, and it probably would have more of a proper ending point and landing for me. one storyline functionally ends rather quickly. Beyond anything else I might have spared, most of the runtime of this volume is spent building up towards it, and then it goes on pause, and then it just happens, and then it fizzles out from there, with only in the final few dying moments of the volume that it sets a second wind of life. The other one lacks the emotional gut punch that I really think it needed. It appears midway through the volume, there's a lot of running about, a lot of not fighting, then some fighting, then it ends, and it then doesn't have the big emotional conclusion that I really think it should have done. This is probably the most emotionally heavy volume of the series thus far. I commend it for trying, because it would have been incredibly easy for them to just do a volume of just fighting, just beating the big bad guy, and that was it. And there was a certain section of the fan base, and seemingly the wider anime manga fan base more generally, that would have been just fine with that, just more heroes punching each other for God knows how many weeks. And in the end, again, I'm happy that they tried, but I think that the two storylines, whilst in their own individual ways, are strong and are good. I think that together they do take something away from one another, and that had things been handled and paced out a little bit better, this could easily have been the best volume thus far. But at the end of the day, it does feel like it's undermining itself. Again, as I've said previously, this is not a bad volume, and there's still a lot to praise with it. I still think there's a lot that goes about it that is good. But at the end of the day, the thing that undermines them is those end points. They don't quite stick the landing, which makes the journey up until this point feel a little bit too lackluster for my liking. But anyway, with all that said and done, let us get into Comment Corner! Now it's time for Comment Corner. We have Big X1 back once again like a renegade master, who is talking about the previous episode that we reviewed, which was episode 0. They say it was fun. I had hoped for more, but it was fun. Thank you for your comment, and I have to say that I do agree with you. I think the episode 0, is fun enough for what it is. I think that it's perfectly enjoyable, and the little slice that we get it to really isn't as fun as it could have been or should have been, but hey ho, it's perfectly fine for what it is. Again, would have enjoyed a little bit more from it, but, you know, can't complain. It was essentially just a trailer, a comic book, or I should say, manga trailer, and it does everything it needs to perfectly well. But anyway, with all that said and done, what did you think about this particular volume of Vigilantes? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be read out in a future video. Whilst you're there, be sure to do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is a decreasingly scary place to spoil broadcasters. Anyway, that's all I have to say from me, so I'll just say, see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!